The scream came from the east tower before the sun had even risen, and Elena Vasquez was already running before she understood why. Smoke curled from the lower gate. Metal clanged against metal somewhere near the stables, and the ground itself seemed to shake under heavy boots. Elena pressed her back against the cold stone wall of the corridor, clutching a basket of linens she had been carrying only moments ago, now forgotten at her feet. Her heart pounded so loudly she was certain someone would hear it. For 3 years, Elena had lived inside the walls of Castle Ashbourne, home to Alpha King Damian Cross, ruler of the Cross territory, and one of the most powerful men in the northern lands. She had polished his floors, folded his linens, and delivered his meals, without ever once looking him directly in the eye. That was the rule she had made for herself the day she arrived. Stay quiet, stay small, never be noticed. It had worked for 3 years. But nothing about this morning felt ordinary. A group of raiders had broken through the outer gate before dawn, moving fast and without warning, testing the strength of the castle's defenses. Elena did not know who they were or what they wanted, only that the guards were shouting orders and the castle bell was ringing without pause, a deep and urgent sound that vibrated through her bones. She should have stayed hidden. She should have found the nearest closet and waited it out, like the other servants were surely doing. Instead, her feet carried her toward the sound of a young guard's cry for help near the supply hall, a sound too raw and too frightened to ignore. She found him slumped against a wooden crate, blood soaking through his sleeve, his face pale with shock. He could not have been older than 19. "Please," he whispered, his eyes wide with fear. "Please, someone." Elena did not think. She dropped to her knees beside him, tore a strip of clean linen from the basket she had somehow still been carrying, and pressed it firmly against the wound. Her hands moved quickly, steady despite the chaos around her, guided by instinct rather than training. "Hold this tight," she told him, her voice calm in a way that surprised even her. "You are going to be fine, just breathe." It was in that moment, kneeling on the cold stone floor with her sleeve pushed up to her elbow, that the fabric caught on the edge of the crate and tore, exposing the pale skin of her wrist to the dim morning light. She did not notice. She was too focused on the guard's ragged breathing, too focused on keeping pressure on the wound, too focused on surviving the next few minutes. She did not see the tall figure who had just rounded the corner, sword still drawn from the fighting outside, his dark eyes sweeping the hallway to assess the damage. Alpha King Damian Cross stopped mid-stride. He had come to check on his wounded men, to make sure the raiders had been pushed back and the castle secured. He expected to see fear in the hallway. He expected chaos and confusion. What he did not expect was a young woman in a plain gray servant's dress, calmly stopping a soldier's bleeding, with more composure than some of his own trained healers. And on her wrist, just visible beneath the torn fabric, was something that made his breath catch. A mark, faint, almost silver in color, shaped like a small flame curling into a circle. He had seen an image like it only once before, in a book so old and so guarded that few in the kingdom even knew it existed. Before he could take a single step closer, more guards rushed past him, blocking his view, calling for a healer to take over. Elena rose to her feet the moment help arrived, murmured something to the healer about pressure and clean bandages, and disappeared down the corridor before Damian could reach her. He stood there a moment longer, staring at the empty space where she had been. The image of that mark burned into his memory. "My lord?" One of his men approached, breathless. "The raiders have retreated. We lost no one. 2 wounded, both stable." Damian nodded absently, still looking down the empty hallway. Who was that? The woman who treated him? The guard blinked, confused by the question given everything else happening around them. "I am not certain, my lord. One of the maids, I believe. There are dozens who work in this wing." Damian said nothing more, but the question stayed with him, long after the smoke had cleared and the castle had returned to its usual rhythm. Elena, meanwhile, had returned to her small room in the servants' quarters, with her hands still trembling. She sat on the edge of her narrow bed and pulled her sleeve down over her wrist, the way she always did, the way her mother had taught her to do since she was a small child. "Never let anyone see it," her mother used to say, her voice always dropping low whenever she spoke of the mark. "Not friends, not neighbors, not anyone who wears a crown. Promise me, Elena." Elena had promised, though she never understood why. Her mother had passed away when Elena was only 15, taking whatever secrets she carried with her, leaving Elena with nothing but a strange mark on her wrist and a warning she had never fully understood. For years, Elena had assumed it was simply an old family superstition, the kind of thing grandmothers whispered about to frighten children into obedience. She had built her entire life around staying unnoticed, taking the quietest jobs, choosing the smallest rooms, avoiding any situation that might draw attention to herself. Working as a maid in the castle of the Alpha King had seemed like the safest possible choice. Nobody looked twice at the servants who cleaned the floors and carried the linens. She could disappear into her role completely, invisible among dozens of others just like her. At least, that was what she had believed until this morning. She did not know that the Alpha King himself had seen her wrist, however briefly, however unclear the moment had been in the chaos of the attack. She did not know that even now, hours later, Damien Cross was sitting in his private study, with an old leather book spread open on his desk, comparing a hand-drawn image on a yellowed page to the picture still fresh in his mind. The book had belonged to his grandfather, and to his grandfather's grandfather before that, passed down through generations of Alpha Kings as a record of the old legends, the stories too strange and too dangerous to share widely, even among trusted advisors. Damien had read it many times as a boy, fascinated by tales of ancient bloodlines and forgotten powers, though he had long since assumed such things belonged only to myth. The page in front of him showed a symbol, nearly identical to what he had seen on the maid's wrist. Beneath the drawing, in faded ink, a single line of old script remained legible. The mark of the flame chooses its bearer, and its bearer chooses the fate of the kingdom. Damien closed the book slowly, his mind racing with questions he could not yet answer. He told himself it was nothing. Coincidence, perhaps, or a trick of poor lighting in a chaotic hallway. Marks and birthmarks came in all shapes. It meant nothing that this one happened to resemble a symbol from an old book of legends. And yet he could not shake the feeling that something important had just crossed his path, something he could not afford to ignore. By midday, the castle had returned to its usual business. Servants swept away broken glass near the outer gate. Guards reinforced the damaged section of the wall, and the kitchens prepared a late meal for a household that had missed its usual morning routine. Elena found herself back among the familiar rhythm of chores, grateful for the return to normalcy, grateful that nobody seemed to be paying her any particular attention. She carried a tray of tea to the small sitting room near the eastern wing, where several of the castle's advisors often gathered to discuss matters of the kingdom. She kept her eyes down, as she always did, setting the tray on the low table with practiced quiet, preparing to slip away unnoticed. "You there?" The voice was deep, calm, and carried an unmistakable authority that made everyone in the room fall silent. Elena froze halfway to the door, her back still turned. She recognized the voice immediately, though she had rarely heard it directed at her before. Slowly, she turned to face Alpha King Damien Cross, who stood near the window, his dark eyes fixed directly on her in a way that made her stomach twist with unease. "Yes, my lord?" she managed, keeping her voice steady despite the sudden pounding of her heart. "Were you the one who helped the wounded guard this morning, near the supply hall?" Elena hesitated only a moment before nodding. "Yes, my lord. I happened to be nearby when it happened." "You handled the situation well." His tone gave nothing away, neither praise nor suspicion, simply an observation. "Where did you learn to treat a wound like that?" "My mother taught me, my lord. She often helped injured travelers in our village when I was young." It was true, though it was only a small piece of a much larger truth she had never shared with anyone. Damien studied her for a long moment, his gaze moving briefly, almost imperceptibly toward her wrist, which was now covered by a fresh sleeve and a simple bracelet she had put on that morning, without quite understanding why. Elena felt her pulse quicken under his attention, though she could not have said exactly why his gaze made her so uneasy. "What is your name?" he asked. "Elena, my lord. Elena Vasquez." "Thank you for your service today, Elena Vasquez." His voice remained even, giving nothing away, though something flickered briefly behind his eyes, something that looked almost like recognition, though of what, Elena could not begin to guess. She curtsied quickly and left the room as fast as she reasonably could without appearing rude, her hands trembling slightly as she made her way back toward the kitchens. She told herself it was nothing unusual. Alpha Kings often thanked those who assisted during emergencies. It meant nothing more than simple courtesy, she assured herself, though a small and persistent voice in the back of her mind refused to be entirely convinced. That evening, As the castle settled into its usual quiet, Damien sat alone in his study once more, staring at the old book without opening it. His beta and closest advisor, Marcus, entered after a brief knock, carrying a report on the day's security breach. The raiders were mercenaries, hired by someone outside our territory, Marcus said, setting the report on the desk. We are still working to determine who sent them. Damien nodded absently, his mind elsewhere. Marcus noticed immediately. He had known Damien since childhood, had fought beside him through countless battles and disputes, and could read his friend's moods better than almost anyone else in the kingdom. Something is troubling you. It is not the attack, is it? Damien hesitated, weighing how much to share even with someone he trusted completely. Finally, he tapped the closed book on his desk. Do you remember the old stories our grandfathers used to tell, about the mark of the flame? Marcus frowned, searching his memory. Vaguely, something about a bloodline hidden away generations ago, meant to protect the kingdom during a time of great danger. I always assumed it was simply a story meant to teach children about loyalty. I saw the mark today, Damien said quietly. On the wrist of one of the maids. Marcus stared at him, clearly uncertain whether to take the statement seriously. You cannot be certain of what you saw in the middle of an attack, Damien. It could have been anything. A scar, a birthmark, a trick of the light. Perhaps, Damien admitted, though his tone made it clear he did not fully believe his own words. But I intend to find out. Marcus studied his friend carefully, noting the unusual intensity in his expression, an intensity Damien rarely showed except in matters of genuine importance. And if you are right, if the old stories are true? Damien did not answer immediately. He thought of the young woman in the plain gray dress, her hands steady, as she saved a wounded guard's life, her eyes lowered in practiced humility, that now struck him as far too careful, far too deliberate for an ordinary servant. Then everything we thought we understood about this kingdom's future may be about to change, he said finally. Outside, the last light of evening faded over Castle Ashbourne, and somewhere within its walls, a young maid who had spent years perfecting the art of being invisible had just, for the first time in her life, been truly seen. Elena lay awake that night, staring at the shadows dancing across her small ceiling, unable to explain the uneasy feeling settling deep in her chest. She told herself repeatedly that nothing had changed, that the Alpha King's brief attention meant nothing more than simple gratitude for her help during the attack. But some quiet instinct, the same instinct that had guided her hands steady during the crisis that morning, whispered otherwise. Somewhere deep inside her, a door that had been sealed shut for years had just creaked open, and there would be no closing it again. The following morning began quietly, though quiet had come to feel dangerous to Elena, in a way she could not fully explain. She rose before dawn, as she always did, dressed in her usual gray uniform, and made her way toward the kitchens, to collect the morning trays, hoping that today would return to the predictable rhythm she had built her entire life around. It did not. Marcus intercepted her before she had even reached the kitchen doors, his expression polite but unmistakably purposeful. He was a tall man with steady eyes, and the kind of quiet confidence that came from years of loyal service to the Alpha King. Elena had seen him many times from a distance, but had never once spoken to him directly. "Elena Vasquez," he said, his tone even. "The Alpha King requests a moment of your time." Her stomach dropped. "Is something wrong? Did I do something improper?" "Nothing of the sort," Marcus assured her, though his careful phrasing did little to ease her worry. "He simply wishes to speak with you further about yesterday's events." Elena had no choice but to follow him through the winding stone corridors of the castle, past the grand hall, and up a narrow staircase she had never once been permitted to use in her 3 years of service. Servants did not walk these halls. Servants did not enter the private wing, reserved for the Alpha King and his closest advisors. Her hands felt cold, despite the warmth of the rising sun filtering through the tall windows. Marcus led her to a small library tucked away in a quiet corner of the private wing, its shelves lined with old leather-bound books, the air thick with the scent of aged paper and candle wax. Damien stood near the window, his back to the door, though he turned the moment they entered. "Thank you, Marcus," he said. "That will be all." Marcus nodded and left, closing the heavy wooden door behind him, leaving Elena alone with the Alpha King for the first time. She kept her eyes lowered out of habit, her hands clasped tightly in front of her. "You wish to speak with me, my lord?" I did. Damien studied her for a long moment before continuing. I want to ask you something, and I need you to answer honestly. Can you do that? Elena's heart pounded, though she forced her voice to remain steady. Of course, my lord. Yesterday, when you were helping the wounded guard, your sleeve tore. He paused, watching her carefully. I saw something on your wrist, a mark. The room seemed to tilt slightly beneath her feet. For years, Elena had guarded this secret with everything she had, following her mother's dying wish without ever fully understanding why. Now, standing before the most powerful man in the kingdom, she felt the weight of that promise pressing down on her like a physical force. It is nothing, my lord, she said quickly, perhaps too quickly. A birthmark, nothing more. Damien moved closer, his expression neither harsh nor threatening, but unmistakably firm. I have reason to believe it may be something far more significant than a simple birthmark. I would like to see it clearly, if you would allow it. Elena felt torn between two competing instincts. Every part of her wanted to refuse, to protect the secret she had carried since childhood. But another part of her, quieter and more curious, wondered if perhaps the time had finally come to understand what her mother had never explained. Slowly, with trembling fingers, she pushed back the sleeve of her uniform, revealing the pale skin of her wrist, and the faint silver mark curled into the shape of a small flame within a circle. Damien's breath caught audibly. He moved closer still, careful not to touch her without permission, studying the mark with an intensity that made Elena's skin prickle with nervous energy. Where did this come from? He asked quietly. Were you born with it? Yes, my lord. My mother told me never to let anyone see it, but she never explained why. She passed away when I was 15, before I ever learned the full truth. Damien straightened, his expression a complicated mixture of wonder and concern. He walked to a nearby shelf and retrieved an old leather book, setting it carefully on a small table between them, before turning to the page he had studied the previous night. Look at this, he said. Elena stepped closer, her curiosity finally overcoming her caution. The hand-drawn image on the yellowed page showed a symbol nearly identical to the mark on her own wrist, a small flame curling into a perfect circle. What is this? She whispered. It is called the Mark of the Flame, Damien explained. According to the old legends passed down through generations of Alpha Kings, it appears only on those who carry a very old and very hidden bloodline, one connected directly to the founding families of this kingdom. The stories say that whoever bears this mark holds the power to restore balance during times of great danger. Elena stared at the page, her mind struggling to reconcile the fantastic story with the quiet, unremarkable life she had lived until now. That cannot be true. I am simply a maid, my lord. I have no family, no title, nothing that would suggest I carry any kind of special bloodline. Legends are often hidden precisely because those who carry them are made to appear ordinary, Damien said gently. Perhaps your mother knew more than she ever told you. Perhaps she hid you deliberately, keeping you safe from something she feared. Elena thought of her mother's careful warnings, the way she always glanced nervously toward any stranger who lingered too long near their home, the way she never allowed Elena to speak of the mark to anyone, not even trusted neighbors. At the time, Elena had assumed her mother's caution was simply the result of old-fashioned superstition. Now, standing in this quiet library with the Alpha King himself, confirming that the mark held real significance, she began to wonder if her mother's fear had been justified after all. What happens now? Elena asked quietly, unsure whether she truly wanted to know the answer. Damien considered his response carefully before speaking. I do not yet know everything the old legends mean, or how much truth they hold, but I believe your safety may now depend on understanding more than either of us currently knows. I would like to consult with the kingdom's elders, those who remember more of the old stories than what remains written in this book. And if the elders confirm what you suspect, then we will face that truth together, and I will ensure you are protected, whatever it may mean for the future of this kingdom. Elena studied his expression, searching for any sign of deception or hidden motive, but found only quiet determination, and something else she could not quite name, something that made her chest tighten with an emotion she refused to examine too closely. Why does this matter to you, my lord? I am only a maid. Surely, there are more pressing concerns for a king to attend to. Damien was quiet for a long moment before answering. Because if the old legends are true, then what happens to you, may determine the future safety of everyone within these walls, myself included. And because, he added, his voice softening slightly, I find myself unable to ignore the feeling that this matters a great deal, for reasons I am still trying to understand myself. Elena felt heat rise to her cheeks, and quickly looked away, unsure how to respond to the unexpected honesty in his words. Over the following days, life within the castle shifted in ways Elena could hardly have anticipated. She was quietly moved from her small room in the servants' quarters to a modest but comfortable chamber in a more secure section of the castle, though Damien was careful to keep the change discreet, explaining to curious staff members only that additional security measures were being taken following the recent attack. Elena struggled with the sudden change. For years, her entire identity had been built around remaining unnoticed, and now she found herself the subject of quiet, careful attention from the most powerful man in the kingdom. She did not know whether to feel grateful or deeply unsettled by the transformation. Marcus, though initially skeptical of the old legends, began assisting Damien in gathering information from the castle's most trusted elders, individuals who had served the Cross family for generations and remembered stories that had long since faded from common knowledge. One elderly woman named Clara, who had served as a healer within the castle for over 4 decades, proved particularly helpful. She recalled fragments of stories passed down from her own grandmother, tales of a hidden bloodline scattered generations ago, to protect it from enemies who once sought to destroy anyone connected to the kingdom's founding families. They say the bloodline was hidden not out of shame, but out of necessity, Clara explained one afternoon, sitting with Damien and Elena in the same quiet library where Elena had first revealed her mark. Those who carried the mark were sent away, given new names, new lives, protected by secrecy rather than strength. It was the only way to ensure the line survived. Survived for what purpose? Elena asked, her curiosity now fully engaged despite her lingering unease. Clara's expression grew serious. The old stories say that when the kingdom faces its greatest danger, the mark of the flame will awaken within its bearer, granting them the strength needed to restore what has been broken. Whether that is literal or simply a comforting legend, I cannot say for certain. But the stories have been consistent across many generations, passed down with remarkable care for something considered mere myth. Elena absorbed this information slowly, feeling the weight of a history she had never known settling onto her shoulders. She thought of her mother's careful warnings, her insistence on secrecy, her occasional distant sadness that Elena had never fully understood as a child. "Do you think my mother knew all of this?" Elena asked quietly. Clara studied her kindly. "It is very possible, child. Sometimes those who carry such burdens choose to protect their children from the full truth, believing ignorance safer than knowledge. It does not mean she loved you any less. Quite the opposite, perhaps." That evening, alone in her new chamber, Elena allowed herself to cry for the first time in years, mourning not only the mother she had lost, but the truths she would now never be able to ask about directly. She felt overwhelmed by the sudden shift in her circumstances, torn between fear of what her mark might mean and a growing cautious curiosity about the history she had unknowingly carried her entire life. Meanwhile, in his own private study, Damien found himself equally consumed by thoughts of Elena, though for reasons that extended beyond mere concern for an ancient prophecy. He told himself repeatedly that his growing interest in her was simply a matter of duty, a king's responsibility to protect someone who might hold significance for the kingdom's future. Yet he could not fully convince himself that duty alone explained the way his thoughts returned to her throughout the day, or the quiet satisfaction he felt whenever she spoke with growing confidence, rather than the practiced silence she had maintained during her years as an unnoticed maid. He did not yet understand what any of this meant for either of their futures, but he understood, with quiet and growing certainty, that nothing would ever return to the way it had been before he first saw the sacred mark curled upon her wrist. The elders of Castle Ashbourne gathered rarely, and only for matters the Alpha King considered of the highest importance. Word spread quickly through the household that a private council had been called, though none of the staff knew the true reason behind it. Elena sat near the back of the small meeting hall, her hands folded tightly in her lap, watching as 4 elderly men and women took their seats around a long wooden table alongside Damien and Marcus. She had never felt more out of place in her life. "I have called you here," Damien began, his voice carrying the calm authority of someone accustomed to command, "because we may be facing something none of us have prepared for. I ask that everything discussed today remain within these walls." One by one, the elders shared what fragments of the old stories they remembered, some contradicting each other slightly, others aligning with remarkable precision, despite having come from different family lines entirely. A pattern began to emerge, one that painted a picture far larger than Elena had ever imagined. Centuries ago, before the Cross family had secured full control over the northern territories, the kingdom had faced a period of devastating conflict between rival bloodlines, each seeking to claim power through any means necessary. During this time, a smaller bloodline connected to the original founding family had been targeted specifically, hunted, not for wealth or land, but because they were believed to carry an ability capable of unifying fractured packs under a single, lasting peace. Rather than risk this bloodline's destruction, the family had made the difficult decision to scatter its remaining members across distant villages, stripping them of their titles and history, hiding them behind ordinary lives so thoroughly that even they themselves would eventually forget what they once were. "The mark of the flame was meant to remain dormant," explained an elder named Henry, his voice raspy with age. "Passed quietly from parent to child, hidden and protected, until such time as the kingdom's need became great enough to call it forward again." "And you believe that time has come now?" Marcus asked skeptically, though his tone carried less doubt than it had days earlier. "I believe," Henry said carefully, "that the mark does not appear without reason. If it has surfaced after so many generations of silence, then something within this kingdom, or threatening this kingdom, has changed enough to require it." Elena listened to all of this with a strange, hollow feeling settling in her chest. It was one thing to imagine her mark as a curious family trait, something unusual but ultimately harmless. It was another thing entirely to hear it discussed as though it carried the weight of an entire kingdom's future. "What would it mean?" she finally asked, her voice smaller than she intended. "If I truly am connected to this old bloodline, what would be expected of me?" The room fell quiet. Damien glanced at her, his expression unreadable, before answering carefully. "No one is certain, Elena. The legends speak of ability and purpose, but they do not provide clear instructions. It is possible that nothing at all changes, beyond simply knowing the truth of where you came from. And it is also possible," Henry added gently, "that a great deal changes. We cannot promise certainty in matters this old and this rare." Elena appreciated the honesty, even as it did little to calm her growing unease. After the council dispersed, Damien found Elena standing alone near a tall window overlooking the castle's eastern gardens, her arms wrapped around herself despite the warmth of the afternoon sun. "You are frightened," he observed quietly, coming to stand beside her. "Would you not be, my lord, if you discovered everything you believed about your own life might be built on secrets you never knew existed?" "Perhaps," he admitted, "though I would also try to remember that discovering the truth does not erase who you already are. Whatever this mark means, it does not undo the woman who calmly saved a guard's life while chaos surrounded her, or the years you have spent quietly caring for this household without ever once seeking recognition." Elena turned to look at him, surprised by the gentleness in his words. "You speak differently than I expected an Alpha King to speak." A faint smile touched his lips. "Perhaps you simply never had reason to hear me speak this way before." Something shifted quietly between them in that moment, an unspoken understanding neither of them yet knew how to name. Elena looked away first, her cheeks warming, uncertain how to process the strange new closeness developing between herself and a man whose presence had once felt entirely unreachable. Over the following week, Damien insisted that Elena receive proper training, both to better understand the history she now carried, and to prepare her, however uncertain the need might be, for whatever the mark's true purpose might eventually require. Clara took charge of teaching her the old stories in greater depth, while Marcus, despite his initial reluctance, began instructing her in basic self-defense, insisting that regardless of ancient prophecy, practical safety mattered a great deal, given the recent attack on the castle. Elena found herself surprised by how quickly she adapted to this new rhythm. Years of quiet observation as a maid had trained her to learn quickly and retain detail, skills that proved unexpectedly useful as she absorbed the old stories and practiced careful, controlled movements under Marcus's patient guidance. "You learn faster than most new recruits I have trained," Marcus admitted one afternoon, watching her successfully block a slow, deliberate strike during their practice session. I have spent years learning to notice everything around me, without being noticed myself, Elena replied. Perhaps that attention translates well into other skills. Marcus studied her thoughtfully. The Alpha King speaks of you differently than I have heard him speak of anyone in a long while. Elena's hands stilled. What do you mean? I have served beside him since we were boys. He does not often allow himself to be uncertain, and he rarely shows genuine concern for those outside his closest circle. Yet since your mark was discovered, I have watched him ask after your well-being, more times than I can easily count. Elena did not know how to respond, her heart fluttering with a confusing mixture of hope and hesitation. She reminded herself firmly that whatever attention Damien showed her was almost certainly rooted in duty, in his responsibility as king to protect someone connected to an ancient prophecy. It would be foolish, she told herself, to imagine anything more. And yet, late one evening, as she passed through the quiet castle gardens on her way back to her chamber, she found Damien sitting alone on a stone bench beneath a wide, old oak tree, his expression distant and thoughtful in a way she had not seen before. "My lord?" she asked softly, hesitant to disturb him. He looked up, and something in his expression softened immediately upon seeing her. "Elena, I did not expect anyone else to be awake at this hour." "I could not sleep," she admitted, stepping closer. "Too many thoughts. May I sit?" He gestured to the space beside him, and she settled onto the bench, careful to leave a respectful distance between them, despite the strange pull she felt to close it. They sat in comfortable silence for a long moment, before Damien finally spoke. "I find myself thinking of you, far more than I probably should, given everything else this kingdom requires of my attention." Elena's breath caught. "My lord, I do not think it wise to—" "I know," he interrupted gently. "I know it is complicated, given who I am, and who you were believed to be, until only recently. But I find myself unable to pretend otherwise, Elena. Whatever the old legends mean, whatever the future holds for this kingdom, I cannot ignore the fact that you have become someone whose safety, whose happiness, matters to me a great deal." Elena's heart pounded loudly in her chest, torn between the practical caution she had spent years cultivating and the undeniable warmth spreading through her at his words. "I do not know what to say, my lord." "You do not need to say anything tonight," Damien replied softly. "I simply wanted you to know the truth of my thoughts, whatever you choose to do with that knowledge." They sat together beneath the old oak tree, as the stars slowly emerged overhead, neither speaking further, though the quiet understanding between them had shifted into something neither could easily ignore. For the first time since her mother's warning so many years ago, Elena allowed herself to wonder if perhaps the life she had built around hiding and invisibility might finally be ready to change into something entirely different. But even as hope stirred quietly within her, a persistent unease lingered at the edges of her thoughts, a warning she could not quite silence. Somewhere beyond the safety of these castle walls, word of her mark had already begun to travel, carried by whispers and rumors toward ears that would see her not as a woman deserving of protection, but as a threat requiring elimination before she could ever discover the full truth of what she was meant to become. The message arrived hidden inside a shipment of grain, tucked beneath the sacks by a merchant who had no idea what he carried. By the time it reached the hands of Alpha Draven, ruler of the neighboring Vale territory, 3 days had passed since the raid on Castle Ashbourne. The note was brief, written in a careful, disguised hand, but its contents were enough to make Draven set down his goblet and read it twice. "The old bloodline has resurfaced within the Cross territory. The mark of the flame has been seen on a servant girl within the castle walls." Draven had heard the old stories as a child, dismissed them as most did, tales meant to frighten young pups into obedience rather than anything resembling truth. But Draven had also spent the better part of a decade trying to find any advantage, any weakness, any opportunity to weaken Damien Cross's hold over the northern territories. If there was even a small chance the old legends held truth, he intended to use it. "Find out everything you can about her," he told his second-in-command, a sharp-eyed man named Peter, who had served him loyally for years. "Her name, her history, where she came from. If this bloodline is real, I want to know before Damien Cross fully understands what he has in his possession." Peter nodded and left without question, already calculating how to place eyes and ears within a castle that had grown increasingly cautious since the recent attack. Meanwhile, inside Castle Ashbourne, Life had begun to settle into an uneasy new rhythm. Elena continued her training with Marcus each morning, growing steadily more confident in her ability to defend herself, while spending her afternoons with Clara, absorbing every fragment of history the old healer could recall about the hidden bloodline and the legends surrounding it. In the evenings, she found herself increasingly drawn to quiet conversations with Damien, moments that had shifted from cautious formality into something warmer, though neither of them had yet spoken openly about what exactly was growing between them. "Tell me about your mother," Damien asked one evening, as they walked slowly through the castle's quiet library, surrounded by shelves of old books neither of them was truly paying attention to. Elena considered the question carefully. She was kind, but always careful. "She kept us moving from village to village when I was very young, never staying anywhere longer than a year or two, though I did not understand why at the time. It was only once we finally settled permanently, when I was around 10, that I realized how unusual our earlier life had been. I believe so now, though she never said as much directly. She would grow anxious whenever strangers asked too many questions about our family, and she made me promise, more than once, that I would never speak of the mark to anyone, no matter how much they might ask." Damien nodded thoughtfully. "It sounds as though she understood the danger the mark carried, even if she never fully explained its origin to you." "I wish she had told me more before she passed," Elena admitted quietly. "I spent years assuming her caution was simply an old family superstition. I never imagined it might be rooted in something this significant." Damien reached out, gently taking her hand in his, a small gesture that nonetheless sent warmth spreading through Elena's chest. "Whatever she chose not to tell you, I believe she did so out of love, wanting to protect you for as long as possible, from a burden she likely carried herself." Elena looked up at him, surprised by how naturally her hand fit within his. "You have been remarkably patient with me through all of this, my lord. Please," he said softly, "when we are alone like this, you may simply call me Damien." The simple request carried more weight than either of them acknowledged aloud, a small but significant step toward something neither of them had yet named directly. Their quiet moment was interrupted by the sound of hurried footsteps approaching the library. Marcus appeared in the doorway, his expression tense in a way that immediately drew both their attention. "Forgive the interruption," he said, glancing briefly at their joined hands before continuing, his tone all business despite the small observation. "We have received word from one of our border scouts. Alpha Draven's territory has shown unusual movement over the past 2 days. Increased patrols, additional guards stationed near our shared border." Damien's expression hardened immediately, the warmth from moments earlier replaced by the sharp focus of a leader assessing a potential threat. "Do we know the cause?" "Not with certainty," Marcus admitted. "But given the timing, I would not rule out the possibility that word of Elena's mark has already reached beyond our walls." Elena felt a chill settle over her, despite the warm evening air. "How could word have spread so quickly? We have been careful." "Castles are full of eyes and ears, Elena," Marcus said gently. "Even the most careful secrets rarely remain contained for long, particularly when servants, guards, and visitors move freely through these halls each day." Damien's jaw tightened. "Increase security around the eastern wing immediately. I want guards stationed near Elena's chamber at all times, and I want anyone entering or leaving the castle carefully monitored until we understand exactly what Draven knows." Marcus nodded and left quickly to relay the orders, leaving Damien and Elena alone once more, though the earlier warmth between them had been replaced by a shared tension neither could easily shake. "Do you think he means to come after me?" Elena asked quietly. Damien's expression softened slightly, though worry remained clearly visible behind his eyes. "I do not know for certain what Draven intends, but I promise you, Elena, I will not allow anyone to harm you while you remain under my protection. And if he tries anyway, then we will face that challenge together, exactly as we have faced everything else since this began." Elena wanted desperately to believe the confidence in his voice, though a quiet unease continued to linger at the edges of her thoughts. A persistent worry that the peaceful rhythm they had begun to build together might soon be tested in ways neither of them could fully anticipate. Over the following days, the castle's security tightened noticeably. Additional guards patrolled the outer walls. Visitors were questioned more thoroughly before being granted entry, and Damien personally reviewed the credentials of every merchant and traveler seeking access to the castle grounds. Elena, meanwhile, continued her training with renewed determination, understanding now more than ever the importance of being able to protect herself should the need ever arise. Marcus noted her rapid improvement with quiet approval, pushing her further with each session, teaching her not only basic defense, but also how to remain calm and clear-headed under pressure. Fear will always try to control your movements, he told her during one particularly intense session. The key is learning to acknowledge it without allowing it to make your decisions for you. Elena took the lesson to heart, practicing late into the evenings, even after Marcus had concluded their formal sessions, determined to be ready for whatever challenges lay ahead. One quiet afternoon, while walking through the castle's inner courtyard, Elena noticed a young stable hand watching her a little too closely, his gaze lingering longer than seemed natural for a simple passing glance. She said nothing at the time, dismissing it as harmless curiosity, though the memory nagged at her throughout the rest of the day. That evening, she mentioned the encounter to Damien during their usual quiet conversation in the library. "Which stable hand?" he asked immediately, his expression sharpening with concern. "I do not know his name. Young, perhaps 18 or 19, dark hair. He has only worked here a few months, I believe." Damien's expression grew troubled. "I will have Marcus look into his background immediately. It may be nothing, but given everything currently at stake, I would rather investigate every possibility than overlook something important." Elena appreciated his caution, though the incident left her feeling unsettled for the rest of the evening, a quiet reminder that despite the growing warmth between herself and Damien, the danger surrounding her situation remained very real and very close. She did not yet know that Marcus's investigation would soon reveal something far more troubling than a simple, curious stable hand. A discovery that would force both Elena and Damien to confront the uncomfortable truth that danger to her safety might already exist within the very walls meant to protect her. Marcus's investigation into the young stable hand took only 2 days to produce results, though what he uncovered proved far more troubling than either he or Damien had anticipated. The young man, who had given his name as Owen upon joining the castle staff 3 months earlier, had no verifiable history in any of the surrounding villages. His references, once carefully checked, led to addresses that did not exist, and names that no one recognized. "He is not who he claims to be," Marcus reported grimly, standing before Damien's desk with a folder of gathered documents. "Whoever placed him here went to considerable effort to create a false background convincing enough to pass initial inspection." Damien's expression darkened. "Bring him in for questioning, quietly if possible. I do not want to alert anyone else who may be working alongside him." The questioning revealed little at first. Owen maintained his innocence stubbornly, insisting he was simply a stable hand seeking honest work, though his composure cracked slightly under Marcus's careful, patient pressure. Eventually, faced with evidence of his fabricated history, he admitted the truth in exchange for leniency. He had been sent by Alpha Draven months earlier, well before Elena's mark had even been discovered, planted as a long-term source of information regarding Castle Ashbourne's internal affairs. Once word of the mark reached Draven's territory, Owen had received new instructions, tasked specifically with confirming Elena's identity and reporting any details regarding her location and daily habits within the castle. "Did you report anything already?" Damien demanded, his voice carrying a controlled but unmistakable edge of danger. Owen hesitated only briefly before nodding. "I confirmed her name and her general appearance. I had not yet learned enough about her daily schedule to report anything more specific." Damien's jaw tightened with barely contained frustration. "You will remain confined until we determine what further use your information may be to us. If you cooperate fully, your situation may yet improve." Once Owen had been led away, Damien turned to Marcus, his expression grim. "This confirms our fears. Draven already knows enough to consider Elena a significant concern, and he now has confirmation of her location within these walls." "What is our next step?" Marcus asked. "We increase security further, obviously. But more importantly, we need to understand exactly what Draven intends to do with this information. Does he mean to capture her, eliminate her, or simply monitor the situation from a distance?" "Given his history," Marcus said carefully, "I would not assume the most peaceful interpretation." Damien's expression hardened further, though beneath the controlled anger, a deeper worry had begun to settle, one rooted less in political strategy, and more in a fear he had not expected to feel so strongly for anyone beyond his closest circle. When he informed Elena of the discovery later that evening, her reaction was calmer than he expected. though he could see the effort it took her to maintain that composure. "I suspected something was wrong," she admitted. "The way he watched me felt deliberate, not curious." "Your instincts served you well," Damien said. "I only wish we had discovered the truth before he had any opportunity to report information at all. What do we do now?" "We remain cautious, and we continue preparing you as thoroughly as possible. I have also decided to reach out quietly to a few allied territories, seeking additional support should Draven's intentions prove hostile." Elena nodded, though worry remained clearly visible in her expression. "I do not wish to become the reason for conflict between territories, Damien. If my presence here threatens the safety of your people, perhaps it would be wiser for me to leave." Damien's expression softened, though his tone remained firm. "I will not allow that, Elena. Whatever danger your mark may bring, running would only leave you more vulnerable, not less. You are safer here, surrounded by those who can protect you, than anywhere else you might attempt to hide." Elena wanted to argue further, wanted to insist that she could not bear the thought of innocent people suffering because of a mark she had never asked to carry. But something in Damien's steady, unwavering gaze convinced her, at least for the moment, to trust his judgment, rather than her own instinct toward self-sacrifice. Over the following week, Clara continued teaching Elena everything she could recall about the old bloodline, hoping that greater understanding might help Elena prepare for whatever challenges lay ahead. During one particularly detailed lesson, Clara revealed a piece of information that struck Elena with unexpected force. The stories say that those who carried the mark of the flame were not merely hidden for their own protection, Clara explained, her voice careful and measured. They were also given new names, entirely disconnected from their original family lines, to ensure no one could trace their heritage, even through careful investigation. "Are you saying Vasquez may not be my true family name?" Elena asked, startled by the implication. "It is possible," Clara admitted. "Family names were often changed deliberately, sometimes multiple times across generations, specifically to prevent anyone from tracing the bloodline back to its origin." Elena absorbed this information slowly, feeling as though the ground beneath her understanding of herself continued shifting further with each new revelation. "Then who am I, truly? If even my name may not be my own?" Clara reached out, taking Elena's hand gently. "You are exactly who you have always been, child. A name does not determine your character or your worth. Whatever your original family line may have been called, the woman sitting before me today is the same kind, capable person you were yesterday and the day before that." Elena appreciated the sentiment, though the uncertainty continued to weigh heavily on her thoughts throughout the following days. She found herself increasingly curious about her mother's past, wondering what name her family might have carried before circumstances forced them into hiding, wondering how many generations had passed since her ancestors last knew the truth of their own heritage. One evening, while reviewing old castle records with Clara in search of any mention of families who might once have carried the mark, Elena came across a brief, faded entry describing a family who had vanished from the region generations earlier under mysterious circumstances, their departure coinciding closely with the timeline Clara had described regarding the bloodline's original scattering. "Family Thornwood," Elena read aloud, studying the faded ink carefully, "departed the region without explanation. Approximately 200 years passed." Clara leaned closer, studying the entry with growing interest. "That timeline aligns closely with the stories I have heard, passed down through my own family. It is possible, though far from certain, that this family may be connected to your own heritage." Elena felt a strange mixture of excitement and unease at the possibility, a small thread connecting her to a history far larger and more significant than she had ever imagined for herself. She did not know whether the connection would ultimately prove meaningful, but simply having a name, even an uncertain one, felt like a small comfort amid the growing uncertainty surrounding her situation. That evening, she shared the discovery with Damien, who listened with genuine interest, encouraging her to continue searching the old records for any further clues regarding her family's true origin. "Whatever we discover," he told her gently, "know that it changes nothing about how I see you, Elena. Whether your name was once Vasquez or Thornwood or something else entirely, you remain the same remarkable woman who has captured my attention and my respect since the very first day I saw you." Elena felt warmth spread through her chest at his words, though the lingering threat of Draven's intentions continued casting a shadow over the growing tenderness developing between them. She could not fully enjoy this new closeness while danger loomed just beyond the castle's protective walls, waiting, she feared, for the right moment to strike. The formal announcement came on a bright morning, nearly 3 weeks after the initial attack, though its wording was carefully chosen to avoid revealing too much to the wider household. Damien gathered his senior staff and closest advisors in the Great Hall, explaining only that Elena Vasquez would now be residing permanently within the castle's protected wing, due to matters of significant importance to the kingdom's future. The reaction among the staff was mixed. Some, particularly those who had worked alongside Elena for years, seemed genuinely pleased by her unexpected change in circumstance, offering quiet words of congratulations whenever they encountered her in the halls. Others regarded the sudden shift with poorly disguised suspicion, whispering among themselves about favoritism or hidden scandal. Elena found the attention deeply uncomfortable, having spent years perfecting the art of remaining unnoticed. She confided this discomfort to Damien one afternoon, as they walked together through the castle's private garden, a space that had increasingly become their preferred location for quiet conversation, away from curious eyes. "I do not know how to exist as someone people notice," she admitted. "For so long, safety meant invisibility. Now I am watched constantly, questioned, whispered about. It feels like standing in the center of a room with no walls." Damien listened carefully, understanding the weight behind her words. "I cannot promise the attention will fade entirely, particularly given everything currently at stake. But I can promise that you are not facing this alone. Whatever the household thinks or says, my support for you remains unwavering." Elena appreciated the reassurance, though the adjustment remained difficult regardless of Damien's steady presence beside her. She found herself missing, in a strange way, the simple predictability of her old life, even as she recognized the genuine warmth and connection growing between herself and the man she had once considered entirely unreachable. Their relationship, though still cautious and largely private, had continued deepening in quiet, meaningful ways. Damien made time each day, regardless of his considerable responsibilities as king, to check on Elena's progress, to share a meal together, or simply to sit in comfortable silence during the quiet hours of evening. One evening, as they shared a simple meal together in his private study, Damien broached a subject he had clearly been considering carefully. "I have been thinking," he began, "about what it might mean for the two of us, going forward. Beyond the matter of your mark, beyond the political concerns surrounding Draven's intentions, I find myself wondering what you envision for your own future, Elena, if circumstances allowed you to choose freely." Elena considered the question thoughtfully, surprised by how naturally an honest answer came to her. "I used to imagine a quiet life, somewhere far from attention, where I could simply exist without fear of discovery. But lately, I find that vision changing. I find myself imagining a future here, within these walls, surrounded by people I have grown to care for deeply." Damien's expression softened with unmistakable warmth. "Does that future include me, Elena?" She met his gaze steadily, her heart pounding, though her voice remained calm. "I believe it does, Damien. More than I ever expected it might." The quiet admission settled comfortably between them, a small but significant step toward acknowledging openly what both had privately understood for some time. Damien reached across the table, gently taking her hand in his, and for a long moment, neither of them spoke, content simply to sit together in the warmth of shared understanding. Their peaceful evening was interrupted, as such moments so often were, by an urgent knock at the door. Marcus entered without waiting for permission, his expression tense with news that clearly could not wait. "Forgive the intrusion," he said quickly. "We have received word from one of our allied territories. Alpha Draven has begun quietly gathering additional forces along his southern border, closest to our shared territory line. Our scouts believe he may be preparing for some kind of movement within the coming weeks." Damien's expression hardened immediately, the earlier warmth replaced by focused concern. "Do we know his specific intentions?" "Not with certainty, but given everything we already know regarding his interest in Elena, I believe it would be foolish to assume his preparations are unrelated." Elena felt her stomach tighten with familiar unease, though she forced herself to remain calm, remembering Marcus's earlier lessons about acknowledging fear without allowing it to control her actions. "What should we do?" "We continue strengthening our own defenses," Damien said firmly. "And we reach out more directly to our allies, ensuring we have sufficient support should Draven's preparations turn into open aggression. Over the following days, the castle's atmosphere shifted noticeably, the earlier calm replaced by a steady undercurrent of preparation and vigilance. Additional guards arrived from allied territories, strengthening the castle's defenses considerably, while Damien spent long hours in strategic discussions with Marcus and other trusted advisors, planning carefully for a variety of potential scenarios. Elena, meanwhile, continued her own preparations with renewed determination, understanding now, more clearly than ever, the very real danger her presence had brought to the kingdom she had come to care for so deeply. Her training with Marcus intensified, and she found herself absorbing new skills with impressive speed, driven by a growing desire to ensure she could contribute meaningfully to her own protection, rather than remaining a passive concern for others to manage on her behalf. "You have improved remarkably," Marcus told her one afternoon, genuine respect evident in his voice, as she successfully countered a series of increasingly complex defensive maneuvers. "Whatever this old bloodline eventually reveals itself to be, you are already proving yourself far more capable than most would expect." Elena appreciated the compliment, though her thoughts remained focused on the larger challenge looming ahead. "Do you believe we can successfully defend against Draven's forces, should it come to open conflict?" Marcus considered the question carefully before answering. "Alpha Cross has never lost a significant conflict during his rule, and our defenses here remain considerably stronger than most territories in the region. But I would be lying if I claimed certainty regarding any outcome involving Draven. He is unpredictable, and unpredictability makes for a dangerous opponent." Elena absorbed this honest assessment with quiet determination, resolving to prepare as thoroughly as possible for whatever challenges lay ahead, understanding that the safety of everyone within these walls, including the man she had come to care for so deeply, might soon depend on decisions made in the coming days. That evening, as she prepared for bed, Clara visited her chamber unexpectedly, carrying an old, worn book Elena had not seen before. "I found this among some older records," Clara explained, handing the book carefully to Elena. "It appears to be a personal journal, written by someone from the Thornwood family generations ago. I believe it may hold answers you have been searching for." Elena accepted the book with trembling hands, recognizing immediately the significance of what she now held. Whatever answers the journal contained, she understood instinctively that reading it would mark yet another significant step in understanding the true nature of the mark she carried, and perhaps, the true nature of the strength she would soon need to call upon. Elena sat alone in her chamber late into the night, the old journal open carefully on her lap, its pages fragile and yellowed with age. The handwriting belonged to a woman named Rosalind Thornwood, who had written her private thoughts nearly 2 centuries earlier, during the very years the bloodline had been forced into hiding. The early entries described an ordinary life, filled with small observations about daily chores, gentle complaints about difficult neighbors, and quiet affection for a husband Rosalind clearly loved deeply. But as Elena continued reading, the tone shifted gradually, growing increasingly anxious and guarded. "They came again today, asking questions about my family," Rosalind had written. "I gave them false answers, as I always do. I grow weary of this constant vigilance, though I understand its necessity. The mark must remain hidden, until such time as the kingdom truly requires what it represents." Elena's hands trembled slightly as she continued reading, absorbing details about a life built entirely around careful secrecy, remarkably similar to the childhood Elena herself remembered, moving frequently between villages, always cautious of strangers who asked too many questions. Further into the journal, Rosalind described the mark itself in greater detail than Elena had yet encountered elsewhere. "The flame does not simply mark our skin," Rosalind wrote. "It marks a connection to something greater, a strength that lies dormant until called upon by genuine need. My grandmother once told me the mark would awaken fully only when its bearer faced a moment where courage and sacrifice aligned completely, a moment when protecting others required embracing the full truth of what we carry." Elena read this passage several times, trying to understand its full meaning. She thought of Marcus's training, of Clara's careful lessons, of Damien's steady support throughout this entire strange journey. She wondered, with growing unease, whether the moment Rosalind described might soon arrive, given the mounting tension surrounding Draven's suspected intentions. The final entries in the journal grew increasingly fragmented, as though written hurriedly under mounting pressure. The last legible passage, written just before the journal ended abruptly, filled Elena with a chill she could not immediately explain. "They have found us," Rosalind had written, her handwriting noticeably shakier than in earlier entries. "I do not know if we will survive what comes next, but I take comfort knowing that even should our line end here, the mark will find another way to continue. Another bearer will rise when the kingdom truly needs them. I only hope whoever reads these words understands that fear is natural, but it need not determine the outcome of what follows." Elena closed the journal slowly, her heart heavy with the weight of Rosalind's words. She did not know what had ultimately happened to Rosalind, whether she had survived whatever danger had found her, or whether her fears had tragically come true. But the message resonated deeply within Elena, offering both comfort and quiet determination as she considered her own uncertain future. The following morning, she shared the journal's contents with Damien, watching his expression grow increasingly thoughtful as she read aloud the most significant passages. "This confirms much of what Clara has already told us," Damien said once she finished. "But it also suggests something important. The mark's true power may not simply exist passively within you. It may require a specific moment, a specific choice, to fully awaken. A moment where courage and sacrifice align," Elena repeated quietly. "I do not know what that means precisely, or how I would recognize such a moment when it arrives." "Perhaps you will simply know when the time comes," Damien said gently. Rosalind seemed to suggest as much herself. Elena appreciated his reassurance, though uncertainty continued to weigh heavily on her thoughts throughout the following days. The castle's preparations for potential conflict continued steadily, guards strengthening their positions along the outer walls, allied forces arriving quietly to bolster the kingdom's defenses, and Damien spending increasingly long hours in strategic council with his most trusted advisors. One afternoon, while walking through the castle's training yard, observing a group of guards practicing formation drills, Elena noticed a familiar figure approaching from across the courtyard. She recognized him immediately as Peter, the sharp-eyed advisor she had once glimpsed briefly during a diplomatic visit from Draven's territory months earlier, before she had ever imagined her mark might one day matter to anyone. Her stomach tightened with immediate unease. "Damien," she said quietly, gesturing toward the approaching figure. "That man serves Alpha Draven." Damien's expression sharpened instantly, his hand moving protectively closer to Elena as Peter approached with careful, measured steps, flanked by 2 guards from Castle Ashbourne, who had clearly been assigned to monitor his movements during what Elena now understood must be an official diplomatic visit. "Alpha Cross," Peter said, offering a respectful but noticeably calculated bow. "My master sends his regards, along with a proposal he believes may benefit both our territories." "Speak plainly," Damien said, his tone carrying unmistakable authority, despite the careful courtesy expected during diplomatic exchanges. Peter's gaze flickered briefly toward Elena, before returning to Damien. "Alpha Draven has learned of certain developments within your household, developments he believes carry significant importance for the future stability of our entire region. He proposes a meeting between yourself and himself, to discuss how this matter might be resolved peacefully, benefiting both our territories, rather than risking unnecessary conflict." "And what exactly does he propose as a peaceful resolution?" Damien asked, his tone carefully controlled despite the obvious tension underlying the conversation. "He believes," Peter said carefully, "that the individual in question would be considerably safer and considerably more valuable to the region's stability, under his direct protection, rather than remaining within a territory currently facing heightened security concerns." Elena felt a cold chill spread through her at the clear implication behind Peter's carefully diplomatic words. Draven was not offering peace. He was demanding that she be surrendered into his custody, dressed in language designed to sound reasonable rather than threatening. Damien's expression remained carefully neutral, though Elena could sense the barely restrained anger simmering beneath his controlled exterior. "You may inform your Alpha that the individual in question remains under my protection, by her own choice, and will continue to do so. If he wishes to discuss matters of regional stability, I am prepared to meet him under appropriate diplomatic circumstances, but I will not surrender anyone under my protection based on vague implications of benefit that clearly serve only his own interests." Peter's expression flickered briefly with something that might have been disappointment, or perhaps simply calculated acknowledgement of an expected response. I will relay your message, Alpha Cross. I trust you understand that my Alpha does not make requests lightly, nor does he consider refusal a final answer. With that, Peter offered another measured bow and departed, escorted carefully by the castle guards toward the outer gate, leaving Damien and Elena standing together in tense, heavy silence. He will not simply accept my refusal, Damien said quietly, once Peter had disappeared from view. This visit was likely intended more as a formality than a genuine attempt at negotiation. Elena felt fear tightening around her chest, though she forced herself to speak steadily. Then what happens next? Damien turned to face her fully, his expression a careful mixture of determination and quiet concern. Then we prepare ourselves fully for whatever comes next, Elena, together, exactly as we have faced everything else since this began. 3 days after Peter's visit, the castle's uneasy calm shattered entirely. It happened during the quiet hours just before dawn, when most of the household remained deep in sleep. Elena woke suddenly, some instinct pulling her from rest before she consciously understood why. She lay still for a moment, listening carefully, and caught the faint sound of movement in the corridor outside her chamber. Footsteps too quiet and too deliberate to belong to any of the guards she had grown accustomed to hearing during their regular patrols. She rose quietly, her heart pounding, and reached for the small blade Marcus had insisted she keep within easy reach during her training. Moving carefully toward her chamber door, she pressed her ear against the wood, straining to identify the source of her unease. The door handle turned slowly, silently, though she had locked it carefully before retiring for the evening. Elena stepped back, just as the door swung open, revealing a figure dressed entirely in dark clothing, his face partially obscured, clearly not one of the castle's regular guards. He froze upon seeing her already awake and alert, clearly having expected to find her still asleep. She did not hesitate. Years of careful training with Marcus took over instinctively, her body reacting before her mind fully processed the danger. She struck quickly, aiming for the intruder's arm as he reached toward her, knocking the concealed blade from his grip before he could use it against her. The intruder recovered quickly, lunging toward her with renewed aggression, but Elena's training held steady. She dodged his advance, using his own momentum against him exactly as Marcus had taught her, sending him stumbling into the wall with enough force to disorient him briefly. "Guards!" she called out, her voice carrying clearly through the quiet corridor. "Intruder!" Within moments, castle guards arrived, quickly subduing the man before he could recover fully from his disorientation. Damien arrived shortly after, his expression carrying a mixture of fury and profound relief upon finding Elena unharmed, though visibly shaken by the encounter. "Are you injured?" he asked immediately, moving to her side, his hands gently checking for any sign of harm despite her assurances. "I am unharmed," Elena said, her voice steadier than she felt internally. "Marcus's training served me well tonight." Damien's expression shifted toward the captured intruder, now restrained firmly by castle guards. "Who sent you?" The man remained silent initially, though careful questioning eventually revealed what Damien had already suspected. He had been sent by Draven, tasked with capturing Elena quietly and transporting her across the border before her absence could even be noticed by the castle's remaining defenses. "This confirms everything," Marcus said grimly, once the intruder had been secured for further questioning. "Draven has moved beyond simple diplomatic pressure. He is now willing to act directly against us." Damien's expression hardened with controlled fury. "Then we must respond accordingly. Gather the senior guards immediately. We will discuss our full strategy within the hour." As the castle around them stirred fully awake, servants and guards alike responding to the unfolding crisis, Elena found herself standing quietly beside Damien, processing the reality of what had just occurred. "He nearly succeeded," she said softly. "Had I not woken when I did, had I not remembered everything Marcus taught me." "But you did wake," Damien said firmly, turning to face her fully. "And you did remember everything you were taught. You protected yourself tonight, Elena, exactly as I always believed you capable of doing." Elena appreciated his confidence, though the lingering fear from the encounter remained difficult to shake entirely. "This will not be his last attempt, will it?" "No," Damien admitted honestly. "I do not believe it will be. Draven has shown his hand now, and I suspect he will move more directly and more quickly, understanding that further delay only strengthens our own preparations." Over the following hours, the castle transformed fully into a fortress prepared for imminent conflict. Additional guards arrived from allied territories that had been quietly gathering in anticipation of exactly this kind of escalation. Damien met continuously with his senior advisors, finalizing defensive strategies, while simultaneously preparing contingencies, should Draven choose to escalate toward open confrontation, rather than further covert attempts. Elena, despite the fear still lingering from the night's events, found herself drawn increasingly toward active participation, rather than passive waiting. She sought out Marcus that same morning, her expression determined despite visible exhaustion from the sleepless night. "I want to help prepare our defenses," she told him, "not simply hide within these walls while others risk themselves protecting me." Marcus studied her carefully before nodding, clearly recognizing the genuine resolve behind her request. "Your training has progressed well, Elena. If Alpha Cross agrees, I believe you could contribute meaningfully to our preparations, particularly given your unique perspective on what Draven may attempt next." Damien, when consulted, agreed readily, understanding that Elena's growing confidence and capability represented genuine strength rather than reckless risk-taking. Together, the three of them, along with several other trusted advisors, spent the following days meticulously reviewing every possible approach Draven's forces might attempt, strengthening weak points in the castle's defenses, and preparing careful contingencies for a variety of potential scenarios. During one particularly long planning session, Clara arrived unexpectedly, her expression carrying unusual urgency. "I believe I have found something significant," she announced, holding several old, carefully preserved documents. Additional pages from the Thornwood family records, describing more specifically how the Mark's power might be called upon during moments of genuine crisis. Elena took the documents eagerly, scanning through Clara's careful translations of the old, faded script. The passages described, in greater detail than Rosalind's personal journal had offered, specific circumstances under which previous bearers of the mark had successfully accessed its hidden strength, always during moments of extreme danger, always when protecting others mattered more than personal safety. According to this, Clara explained, the mark's power manifests most clearly when its bearer faces a direct threat to those they have come to care for deeply, rather than simply facing danger to themselves alone. Elena absorbed this information carefully, understanding its implications with growing clarity. Whatever confrontation lay ahead with Draven's forces, her own role might prove more significant than simply remaining protected behind castle walls. If Rosalind's writings held truth, the moment when her mark's true power might finally awaken could arrive precisely during the conflict everyone now anticipated. She shared this realization with Damien later that evening, watching his expression shift through concern, understanding, and finally, reluctant acceptance. "I do not wish to place you directly in harm's way," he admitted, "but I also understand that attempting to shield you entirely from what comes next may ultimately prevent you from becoming who you are truly meant to be. Then we face this together," Elena said firmly, "exactly as we have faced everything else." Damien reached for her hand, holding it gently but firmly. "Together," he agreed quietly. "Whatever comes next, we face it together." Outside the castle walls, scouts reported increasing movement along Draven's border, confirming what everyone within Castle Ashbourne now understood, with growing certainty. The confrontation they had been carefully preparing for was no longer a distant possibility, but an approaching certainty, drawing steadily closer with each passing day. The full moon rose pale and heavy over the northern hills on the night Draven's forces finally crossed the border, exactly as Damien's scouts had predicted they eventually would. Word reached Castle Ashbourne swiftly, carried by riders who had pushed their horses hard through the darkening evening to deliver the warning in time. "They are moving quickly," Marcus reported, spreading a detailed map across the war table in Damien's private council chamber. "If our estimates hold true, they will reach the outer fields within a matter of hours." Damien studied the map carefully, his expression calm, despite the mounting tension filling the room. Weeks of careful preparation had brought Castle Ashbourne's defenses to their strongest point in generations, reinforced further by allied forces who had arrived quietly over recent days, understanding the significance of what was truly at stake. "Position our forces exactly as we discussed," Damien instructed. "I want the outer fields defended firmly, but I do not want unnecessary confrontation if it can possibly be avoided." Draven's true target remains Elena. If we can protect her successfully, while minimizing broader conflict, that remains our preferred outcome. Elena stood quietly near the edge of the war table. Her earlier fear now settled into something steadier, a calm determination born from weeks of careful preparation and growing confidence in her own capabilities. She had spent considerable time training alongside Marcus and studying every fragment of the Thornwood family records Clara had managed to uncover, preparing as thoroughly as circumstances allowed for whatever this confrontation might ultimately require of her. "I want to be present during the confrontation," she said firmly, addressing Damien directly. "Not hidden away in some distant chamber while others face danger on my behalf." Damien's expression carried visible concern, though he did not immediately refuse her request, understanding by now that Elena's determination rarely bent to simple protective instinct alone. "I cannot guarantee your safety if you are present during active conflict, Elena. I understand the risk," she said steadily, "but if Rosalind's writings hold any truth, my presence may prove more valuable during this confrontation than my absence ever could." After a long moment of careful consideration, Damien nodded reluctantly. "Then you will remain close to myself and Marcus at all times, positioned where we can act quickly to protect you should the need arise." The hours that followed passed with agonizing slowness, the castle's defenders positioning themselves carefully along the outer fields, as reports continued arriving regarding Draven's approaching forces. Elena stood beside Damien near the front lines, her heart pounding steadily, as the first signs of Draven's army became visible in the distance, torches flickering against the darkening evening sky. Alpha Draven himself rode at the front of his forces, his expression carrying unmistakable confidence as he approached the boundary line separating the two territories. He raised a hand, signaling his forces to halt at a respectful distance, before urging his horse forward alone to address Damien directly. "Alpha Cross," Draven called out, his voice carrying easily across the quiet field. "I had hoped this matter might be resolved through more civilized discussion. It seems you have chosen a different path. You sent an intruder into my castle to capture an innocent woman by force," Damien replied, his voice carrying clear authority despite the tension of the moment. "I would hardly call that civilized discussion." Draven's expression flickered briefly with something that might have been genuine irritation. "I offered you a peaceful resolution, one that would have avoided exactly this kind of confrontation. You chose instead to shelter something that does not belong solely to your territory." "She belongs to no one," Elena said, stepping forward before she fully considered the wisdom of speaking directly, her voice carrying clearly, despite the fear still fluttering nervously in her chest. "I am not a possession to be claimed by whichever Alpha believes they deserve me most." Draven's gaze shifted toward her, studying her carefully for the first time. Ah, the bearer herself, finally willing to speak for herself, rather than hiding behind Cross's protection. "I have never hidden," Elena replied steadily. "I have simply chosen carefully who deserves my trust, and you, Alpha Draven, have given me no reason whatsoever to extend that trust toward you." Draven's expression hardened slightly, though he maintained his composed demeanor. "Very well. If words alone cannot resolve this matter, perhaps a demonstration of strength will prove more persuasive." Without further warning, Draven signaled sharply toward his gathered forces, and the confrontation Damien's defenders had spent weeks preparing for finally began in earnest. The chaos that followed unfolded with dizzying speed. Draven's forces surged forward, meeting Castle Ashbourne's defenders along the carefully prepared boundary lines. Damien moved immediately into the thick of the confrontation, his considerable skill as both warrior and leader evident as he coordinated his forces, while personally engaging those who pressed too closely toward Elena's position. Elena remained close to Marcus as instructed, though the sheer intensity of the surrounding conflict tested every ounce of composure her weeks of training had provided. She watched carefully, searching for the moment Rosalind's writings had described, the moment when courage and sacrifice might align in a way that called forth whatever hidden strength her mark truly carried. That moment arrived suddenly and without warning. A group of Draven's fighters broke through the defensive line unexpectedly, moving directly toward Damien's position as he fought to repel another attacker, entirely unaware of the new threat approaching from his unprotected side. Elena saw the danger clearly, understanding instantly that Damien would not notice the threat in time to defend himself properly. Without conscious thought, driven purely by instinct and the overwhelming fear of losing someone who had become so deeply important to her. Elena moved forward, placing herself directly between Damien and the approaching danger. The mark on her wrist began to glow. It started as a faint warmth spreading through her skin, quickly intensifying into a brilliant silver light that illuminated the darkened field with startling clarity. Elena felt strength surge through her entire body, sharp and clear, her senses heightening beyond anything she had ever previously experienced. She moved instinctively, her body responding with a speed and precision far beyond her weeks of training alone, successfully deflecting the attack aimed toward Damien's unprotected position. The surrounding fighters, on both sides of the conflict, paused momentarily, stunned by the sudden brilliant light emanating from Elena's raised wrist. Even Draven, positioned some distance away, turned sharply toward the unexpected display, his expression shifting rapidly from confidence toward genuine uncertainty. Damien, recovering quickly from his surprise, turned to find Elena standing protectively before him, her wrist glowing with the same silver light he remembered from the old book's illustration, her expression fierce, with a strength that seemed to radiate from somewhere far deeper than simple physical training. "Elena," he breathed, momentarily stunned by what he was witnessing. "I am not finished protecting what matters to me," she said, her voice carrying unusual clarity and strength. The battlefield around them seemed to still momentarily, both sides absorbing the significance of what had just occurred. Draven's forces, witnessing firsthand the awakened power of the very bloodline they had been sent to capture, hesitated visibly, uncertain how to proceed against something none of them had genuinely believed existed until this exact moment. Draven himself stared across the field, his earlier confidence replaced by something closer to genuine concern. He had believed the old legends useful primarily as leverage, a valuable prize to be captured and controlled. He had not truly prepared for the possibility that the legends might prove entirely, undeniably real. "This changes things considerably," he called out, his voice carrying less certainty than before. "It should," Damien replied firmly, moving to stand beside Elena, his earlier concern for her safety replaced by profound respect for the strength she had just displayed. "I would strongly suggest reconsidering whatever remains of your original intentions here tonight." The battlefield remained tense, the outcome of the confrontation still genuinely uncertain, though the balance had shifted dramatically in the span of only a few remarkable moments. Whatever happened next, both sides now understood clearly that Elena represented something far more significant than either had originally anticipated when this conflict first began. Draven stared across the battlefield for a long, tense moment, weighing his options carefully as his forces waited uncertainly for his command. The silver light still glowed faintly around Elena's wrist, a clear and undeniable testament to a legend he had never fully believed until this exact moment. "You would risk everything," Draven finally called out, "for a woman whose true nature you only recently discovered yourself?" "I would risk everything," Damien replied firmly, "for the woman standing beside me, regardless of any mark she carries. Elena's worth was never dependent on ancient legends, Draven. That is a truth you have never understood." Draven's expression flickered with something unreadable, perhaps grudging respect, perhaps simple recognition that continuing this confrontation now carried risks far greater than he had originally anticipated. He glanced toward his own forces, many of whom appeared visibly shaken by what they had just witnessed, their earlier confidence replaced by uncertain hesitation. After a long, tense silence, Draven raised his hand, signaling his forces to stand down. "This confrontation ends tonight," he announced, his voice carrying reluctant acceptance. "I will not throw away my forces chasing something that has clearly chosen its own path already." Relief spread visibly through Castle Ashbourne's defenders as Draven's forces began their slow retreat from the boundary line, though Damien remained cautious, understanding that true peace would require more than a single night's reluctant withdrawal. "This is not necessarily finished," Damien said quietly to Elena, once Draven's forces had retreated a safe distance. "But tonight, at least, we have secured a meaningful victory." Elena nodded, feeling the intense strength that had surged through her earlier, gradually settling into a quieter, steadier sense of calm confidence. The mark on her wrist had faded back into its usual faint silver outline, though she now understood, with complete certainty, the true significance of what she carried. In the days that followed, formal negotiations began between Castle Ashbourne and Draven's territory, mediated carefully by representatives from several allied kingdoms who had closely followed the unfolding situation. Draven, faced with undeniable proof of the old legend's truth, ultimately agreed to a formal treaty, acknowledging Elena's protected status, ensuring that no further attempts would be made against her safety, in exchange for certain trade agreements and diplomatic considerations that satisfied his own territory's practical interests. While the political negotiations continued, life within Castle Ashbourne gradually returned to a new, more settled rhythm, one that reflected the significant changes brought about by recent events. Elena, no longer bound by her old instinct toward invisibility, found herself increasingly comfortable stepping into a more visible role within the household, assisting Clara with continued research into the Thornwood family's history, and working alongside Marcus to help train other guards in defensive techniques that might prove useful should similar threats ever arise again. Her relationship with Damien, meanwhile, had deepened considerably following the events of that tense night, the quiet understanding they had built over recent weeks, now openly acknowledged by both. They spent their evenings together freely, no longer concerned with careful discretion, their growing affection widely recognized and warmly welcomed throughout the castle. One quiet evening, several weeks after the confrontation had finally concluded, Damien invited Elena to join him once again, in the same peaceful garden where they had first openly acknowledged their feelings for one another. The old oak tree stood exactly as it always had, its branches gently swaying in the evening breeze. "I have been thinking," Damien began, taking her hand gently in his, "about everything that has happened since I first saw your mark that morning during the attack. I could never have imagined, standing in that chaotic hallway, that discovering something so small would lead to everything we have experienced together since." Elena smiled softly, remembering how frightened she had been that very first day, how certain she had been that her secret would only bring danger and disruption into her carefully hidden life. "I never imagined it either," she admitted. "I spent so many years believing that safety meant remaining invisible, unnoticed, unremarkable. I never imagined that being truly seen, truly known, could bring this kind of happiness." Damien studied her carefully, his expression carrying quiet, unmistakable affection. "Elena, whatever the old legends say about your mark, about the strength and purpose it carries, none of that changes what I have come to feel for you as simply yourself. I love you, not because of ancient prophecy, but because of who you have shown yourself to be, through every challenge we have faced together." Elena felt warmth spreading through her chest at his words, tears gathering at the corners of her eyes, though her smile remained steady and genuine. "I love you as well, Damien. More than I ever believed myself capable of loving anyone." He reached into his coat, producing a small, simple ring, crafted from silver, its design echoing subtly the shape of the mark she carried upon her wrist. "I know our journey together has been unusual, filled with more danger and uncertainty than most couples ever face. But I find myself certain of one thing above all else. I want to build whatever future comes next, together with you, Elena, as my equal, my partner, and my chosen mate." Elena's tears finally fell freely, as she nodded, unable to find words adequate to express the overwhelming happiness filling her heart. "Yes," she finally managed. "Yes, Damien. I want that future with you as well." As Damien gently slipped the ring onto her finger, the mark on her wrist glowed faintly once more, though this time, the light carried none of the fierce intensity from the battlefield, but rather a soft, warm glow that seemed to reflect the quiet joy of the moment itself. News of their engagement spread quickly throughout the castle, met with genuine celebration from staff and allies alike, many of whom had watched Elena's remarkable transformation from an unnoticed maid into someone whose strength and character had ultimately helped secure lasting peace for the entire kingdom. Clara, upon hearing the news, embraced Elena warmly, tears of genuine joy in her eyes. "Rosalind would be proud," she said softly. "The bloodline she feared might end in fear, and hiding, has instead found its way toward genuine happiness and purpose." Marcus, too, offered his sincere congratulations, along with a rare, genuine smile. "I have never seen Damien happier," he admitted. "Whatever the old legends intended for your mark, Elena, I believe they could not have chosen a more deserving bearer." In the months that followed, Elena and Damien's wedding became a celebration not only of their personal union, but of the broader peace their story had helped secure between previously tense territories. Representatives from allied kingdoms attended, along with, notably, a formal delegation from Draven's territory, extending cautious but genuine goodwill toward the newly strengthened alliance between their lands. Elena stood before the gathered crowd on her wedding day, wearing a simple, elegant gown that reflected her continued preference for understated grace over elaborate display, the mark on her wrist visible openly for the first time, no longer hidden beneath careful sleeves and quiet fear. As she exchanged vows with Damien, beneath the same old oak tree where he had first confessed his feelings, Elena reflected on the remarkable journey that had brought her to this moment. She thought of her mother's careful warnings, of Rosalind's hopeful words written nearly 2 centuries earlier, of the quiet strength she had once believed required constant hiding, but had ultimately discovered, flourished most fully, when finally allowed to step into the light. The Alpha King had once looked at her and seen only a maid, quietly performing her duties without any expectation of recognition, but destiny, it seemed, had always intended something greater, waiting patiently beneath a simple gray sleeve for the moment it would finally be seen, understood, and embraced by exactly the right person, at exactly the right time. And as Elena and Damien sealed their union with a promise of partnership and enduring love, the sacred mark upon her wrist glowed one final time, bright and warm beneath the golden light of a peaceful, hopeful evening, a quiet symbol of a story that had finally found its rightful and joyful conclusion.